The first thing you want to do when you're replacing rotors or reinstalling the rotors is go through and make sure that all your bumpers and the stop arm plate is actually in place. So this part out that's going around here is actually the stop arm plate. And if you take a large screwdriver and make sure that your screws are down tight, otherwise when we get the arm over here and in the way and all the in this, it can be a little bit more difficult to get into these things and affect them. Then the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you've got fresh or good rotor stop material. So these have the rubber tube in them, and it just comes in a rubber tube like this, and you stick it in there, use a razor blade and cut it off to length when you need new ones. We want to make sure that there's fresh in there, that we don't have any problems, that it's not sticking out. So go through and tighten all your screws on all of them. The worst thing about putting rotors in is if you get the first, second, and third rotor in and everything's feeling great, and then you go put the fourth rotor in and suddenly you've got a problem with the fourth rotor that needs more attention. So you pull it apart and let's say you have to lap it out. That also means you need to pull 1, 2, and 3 back out of the instrument in order to clean the horn, get everything dried off again, and then reinstall it. It's just a tremendous waste of time. So instead, I want you to go through and check all of the rotors first to make sure that they feel good dry. And remember, if something doesn't work dry, it will never work wet. So it has to work dry first, then we add our lubrication. I'm going to hold the rotor down here with my finger, and then I'm just going to turn it up top. And I want to feel and make sure that I have no catches at all. So I'm not spinning this hard, I'm not spinning it fast. I'm actually trying to be rather sensitive and see if I can feel anything catching in there at all. When I can't, I'm going to drop this one back out and move to the next. And do the exact same process. If you do end up with any questionable rotors, make that the first one you put back together. We're going to take a really high quality oil, like Tech oil, and we're going to lubricate all the parts that actually touch. So right here on top of this plate, this is one of the bearing plates. This is the part that's actually going to touch in underneath the casing. It's going to touch right underneath this top bearing part. So we want to make sure we lubricate there, and we want to make sure we lubricate on the same spot right here. This is where it's going to actually touch. The other thing I'm going to lubricate is once across here and once across here, because as I spin it around, that will add some more lubrication in around the outside of the casing wall. And that's not to make the rotor spin, that's to make the rotor airtight. If I didn't, there's a gap between the rotor and the casing wall, and the air can actually leak past it. So as it comes in here, it would leak past that casing wall and sneak out of the horn. So we lubricate here and here just to make the instrument airtight. Each bearing plate has a notch in it, and before we remove that bearing plate, we make sure that there's a corresponding notch on the rotor. So we're going to line those notches up. Before I do, I'm always going to come in here and add another drop of oil just to make sure it hasn't dripped off. I'm going to line that up really careful. And I'm going to press it in with my thumbs. Before I move on, I'm going to test the rotor, make sure it's spinning. And it is. But now I'm going to visually inspect around the cap. Now it depends on the model of tuba you're working with. Lots of casings are built differently and the caps work differently. Some actually need to be pressed down inside of the casing. Some clip on pretty tight and pretty well. Others are actually tapered, and we need to set the depth and the balance of that plate so it's not creating a bind. So if that casing's off, or if that plate is off, it's actually going to bind against the rotor itself, and we don't want that. So we need to balance those out. I use a really high-tech tool of, I don't know, a piece of wood that I turned down, stuck a hole in the middle of it so that can reach over the bearing that sticks out and actually tap it into place. So I'm going to take my canvas mallet or rawhide mallet and just some soft taps all the way around here just to make sure I've got that plate all the way down. I'm going to test my rotor again. If that's working well, I'm going to put my first stop arm back on. You'll notice on the stop arms that there is a rounded side to one of them usually, and every every manufacturer has a slightly different configuration. So that needs to match the stop arm as well. Now this particular horn, we left these stop arms on because this particular instrument was marked incorrectly. So the dots on the original rotors were actually wrong, which is where you see the cut-in ones here. You see these here? I ended up going in and remarking this horn last year when it was in for work. And so I know that these are mixed up. So I left them on just to make sure I got them back in the right place. Now I'm going to very carefully press that down on there. Again, some need to have more pressure on them than others. I'm going to take a drop of oil inside of those threads so they don't ever get bound up on me. I'm going to make sure that this doesn't cross thread. I'm going to test that rotor. Now, to make sure that it's correct, we're going to come back over to this side, and you see these notches that move on that rotor? There is a corresponding notch right on the top of this. And when I let this loose, the rotor completely stop. You see how it's past that notch just a little bit? What I want is I want that thing to stop right there. And that means the rotor stop material that's in there has actually collapsed a little bit and it needs to be replaced. But now look at this. See how when I put this rotor down, those notches don't line up. And that has me really confused. Really confused. What I want is I want this rotating around to where the other notch lines up with that top one there. But that's not at all happening. So we've got a puzzle on our hands. When that happens, you know you've got something wrong. And normally, it's the rotor stop arm itself is in the wrong place. They'll be cut to where the rotor stop arm either goes on this side, like these two, or on this side, like these two. So you got to figure out the puzzle. So there we have the problem figured out. From there to there. That's what we want to see. I still have this guy a little short in this stroke, so I want to replace it. But the push stroke is great. So it's this bumper here that is a little short. So we've got a couple options that we can do. We can try to squeeze the claw a little bit to squish this material. And so the claw is just this stop arm plate has, as it comes around, it's got two arms like this, and we can actually pinch this in a little bit. When we pinch this, it'll bubble that out just a hair. We do that with a pair of really solid round nose pliers, really carefully coming in. Well, I'm trying. Really like to have that arm out of my way. Out with the old. In with the new. Sometimes it takes a flat blade screwdriver to convince it. Just kind of squish it on in there. Take a fresh razor blade, lay it right up against there, and in a slicing motion, slice him off. Drop that piece on the floor. It works better when you do. And we're still not there. So that's when we go to slightly fatter tubing. So we're going to pop him out of there. I'm probably actually going to open that up just a little bit. Go real slow, real careful when you're opening a claw. Shoving and poking him in there. Take your razor blade, slicey dicey. And now, see how I'm not quite there? So what I want to do is remove just a smidget of material. So we're going to come in on this rotor and we're going to come in right over top of it. And we're going to shave just a smidget off. Now if I cut at an angle like this, coming back, it's going to collapse really fast because it's only hitting up against a little tiny bit of that rubber. So I want to make sure that that is almost, just as perfectly up and down as I can get. So when this arm comes around and hits it, it's hitting that whole flat rubber surface. And I want to make sure it's all the way down against the plate here. Mine was up too high. So now that we got that redone, re-grab our razor blade, re-slice. If you don't make it through the first time, fine, come back, take it a second swing. Now we got it down there all the way. Now I'm going to come in, I'm going to slice just a smidget off the top there. So when you push down too hard on the razor blade when you're doing this, you kind of squish it. And you're going to cut an angle back on it. Don't do that. Saw back and forth. So just use the razor blade, sawing back and forth to cut that edge in. And then that's what we want. Line it up perfect on both strokes. Now all we have to do is repeat that on 3 more rotors for this particular horn and then install it in. So installing them is not that much of a science, but you got to go slow, you got to be really careful, you got to make darn sure you never drop a rotor. They're brass, they're soft brass, and if they get dropped, they're going to dent, period. They're going to dent. And then you got a serious problem on your hands. You got a lot of work that has to be done, and probably send it into a shop that can handle that stuff and is equipped for that. So don't drop one. But get them lubricated, or test them dry first. If they're fit and dry and feeling no hesitations in them at all, take it out, relubricate it, stick it in there, put your plate on, make sure everything lines up perfectly. Put your stop arm on there, make sure that that works perfectly. Change your rubber felts if you need to, and repeat.